Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 30th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Republican Party's inability to fundraise money to the level that the Democratic Party has been able to this midterm election year, and the electoral repercussions of such a move by the GOP, a move that is not intentional, but a product of their own candidates and their candidate qualities that have really been exasperated by Democratic ads that have been vilifying these Republican candidates. Altogether, the Democratic Party has been very much so in nearly every single race out fundraising and outpacing the GOP when it comes down to competitive races, swing states, swing districts, whatever it might be. Altogether, the Republican Party is broke. And when I say that, that isn't to say that they have no chance at recovering in time between now before the November midterm elections, but there are some very, very big red flags that are waving high in the sky right now that are telling us the Republican Party is struggling. Not only are they struggling, they are finding it nearly impossible to fund many of these candidates. They are, technically speaking, outspending the Democratic Party in many of these states, but that's as of right now. In terms of reserved ad spending, in terms of reserved ads for the markets, this upcoming October and November, the Democrats have outpaced the Republicans quite significantly. And what we have found in numerous articles, headline after headline, Republicans confront unexpected online money slowdown. Primary meddlers revealed as Trump hoards his millions. Think about that for a moment. We'll get deeply into Trump for a little bit of this video. Takeaways from new campaign finance reports. Republican donor pool unexpectedly shrinks as midterms near. These are not written in the same time frame. September 8th. When do you find this one? July 26th. When do you find this one? September 21st, right? And the most recent one from the Washington Post, or I guess not actually the most recent one, a day earlier than the one I just showed you from Politico, McConnell-linked super PAC pulling out of the Senate race in Arizona. We talked about this because it was pretty significant, but it doesn't end there. Now, most recently, as of today, GOP billionaire donors direct cash to Senate leaders as Trump candidates lag Dems in fundraising. On the surface level, it seems that there may be some cahoots between the billionaire donors and the direct cash to Senate leaders, and we'll talk about why that actually is not true. And a lot of it has to do with Arizona and other states where we are seeing the National Republican Party unilaterally decide to pull out of an otherwise extremely competitive race, or what could have been an extremely competitive race. So right now, what we need to understand, historical context is important. Democrats typically out-fundraise Republicans, and that does not always translate to a victory. But what we have seen too is that it has translated to victories in some more recent elections. Take a look at some of the elections that have occurred in January 2021. The Georgia runoff elections, that money was pivotal to the Democratic Party winning control of the U.S. Senate. Take a look at some other circumstances where Democrats have out-fundraised Republicans in key Senate races in 2020, in 2018, where Democrats ultimately did come ahead. But unlike we've seen in years prior to, money is no longer everything. Both candidates, both parties have tens of millions of dollars to allocate to some of these races. And right now, what we have seen, historically speaking, is while Democrats do fundraise Republicans, Republicans still put up a good fight. They still spend $90 million for the Democratic Party's $120 million. Biden out-fundraised Trump. He won the election. Clinton out-fundraised Trump, lost the election. So it really just depends. But I would say on the general scale, yes, fundraising more money does translate to a higher chance of victory, simply because you have more resources, more abilities, and a higher chance at winning the electorate if the electorate is more willing to give you money in itself. But outside spenders play a huge role when it comes down to Senate races, House races, governor races, and none more important than the upcoming 2022 midterm elections. A specific case, a beautiful case to illustrate my point, the state of Arizona, where money has mattered more than anything in a state that otherwise should be very, very competitive. Take a look at the ratings from June of 2022. The Republicans had a 39% chance of victory in Arizona Senate race. Past a month, they have a 43% chance at victory, the highest as we have seen recorded. You go to the betting markets, Republicans were the favorites. You go to some polls, Republicans were the favorites. But what FiveThirtyEight has shown is a clear and steady increase for Senator Mark Kelly, who now has an 83% chance at victory to the Republican Party's 17%. We aren't the only ones, though, that see this and know that Mark Kelly is on track to be reelected. Also, the Senate Leadership Fund, the one that slashed funding for the Arizona Senate race. Why is this significant? I've brought this up a few times. Well, in the article that we've seen today, the GOP billionaire donors, the ones that are directing cash to Senate leaders, guess where that's going? Guess where it's not going? We can tell you where it's not going. It's not going to Blake Masters. Instead, it's going according to strategists and those who are advising these billionaires when it comes down to where their money should go, to give their money to the super PAC, Senate Leadership Fund, which is ran, quite literally speaking, he says closely aligned with, but generally what he says goes, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell might have that same title for the next 2 years because of moves like this one. Because billionaires are now funding the Senate Leadership Fund, and we've seen now that McConnell is practically giving up the state of Arizona, the Democrats have yet again locked down an additional Senate race that should have been in reach for the GOP. But the financial struggles don't end just there. It extends well beyond the scope of the U.S. Senate. We also find this in the governor's race in the state of Pennsylvania. In a very similar fashion to the way that Mitch McConnell runs the funding for Senate candidates nationwide, we have Doug Ducey and Pete Ricketts, the governors of Arizona and Nebraska respectively, that handle the funds for Republican candidates nationwide in the governor's races. Well, what did they decide to do in the state of Pennsylvania? They decided that Pennsylvania was not worth their time. It's very interesting. If you look at Doug Ducey's comments on CNN, he was asked, will you spend money on the state of Pennsylvania? And his response was that is yet to be seen. We'll wait until October to make that decision. First of all, red flag number one, this was 2 months ago. Why are you waiting until October to fund the state of Pennsylvania unless you aren't going to fund it, which is probably going to be the case? But what we have found here, not only did they say they're going to wait till October, but Doug Ducey's response to that was also that the Republican Governors Association does not fund losing tickets. They don't fund blowouts against their GOP candidates, as if indicating that Pennsylvania was going to be a blowout. And at that time, honestly speaking, it wasn't going to be. It was not going to be a blowout. This was around the end of July. Josh Shapiro was only meant to win by about 5 points, 6 points at this time. That's not a blowout. Barack Obama, Joe Biden have won states by lesser margins than that, and in no reality, or larger margins than that, and we don't even call that a blowout, right? So to see now the margin, which has jumped up to nearly 10 points for Josh Shapiro, honestly, it is fair to argue that should Doug Ducey, should Pete Ricketts had actually effectively funded this campaign, Doug Mastriano would be in a better position. And they decided not to. Enough so that their own colleagues, their own Republicans, went to the national media, went to social media, and said, you need to fund Doug Mastriano. And you know what? They didn't agree. Of course they didn't agree because they see these numbers as well as we do. These top Republicans, I can guarantee you, have their own political consultants that rely on 538 more than I do. Rely on the Senate forecast more than I do. And they get paid 6 figures to do it. Honestly, I'm quite jealous if you ask me, because they could hire me and I could tell them, I mean, maybe not, I wouldn't, put myself in that position because it's a lot more strenuous than just talking to you guys in general about this this race itself. But I mean, they see these numbers, and it is the reason why they choose not to fund Pennsylvania. It's the reason why they choose not to fund Arizona. But another major reason, which has been the underlying issue, is not that they don't want to fund Arizona because they think that this race has no means of investment. Pennsylvania went to Biden by 1 point. Arizona went to Biden by 0.2. The reason why? They don't have enough money. And when it comes down to a point where you need to choose priorities, does Arizona come to mind for the Senate GOP? No. Does Pennsylvania come to mind to the Republican Governors Association? The answer is no. And that's why this money isn't there. If the money was there, I can guarantee you they would have put money into the race. They have tried to fund, and as we saw when they had a surplus of money in the Senate races, they tried to fund Mitch McConnell's PAC, which again is the same PAC, and think about this because it's quite crazy, the same PAC that was unwilling and is currently unwilling, not only unwilling, canceled the money they already allocated to Arizona for the rest of the election, canceled their ads. What they had decided to do in the past when they had a lot more money, before the Democrats started fighting back, before Roe was overturned, before the Democrats started winning special elections and had a revitalized hope for the midterm elections, what we found was the GOP was funding money not into the swing states, but into crazy states to think about. They funded money into the state of Washington. They thought that Patty Murray might lose her election. Newsflash, she's a Democratic incumbent in a solid Democratic state. Just because it was close once does not mean it will be close again. A lesson that both parties need to take from. But clearly in this case, the Republican Party more than the Democrats. The Republicans also decided to fund the state of Colorado. Thought that Joe O'Dea would have a fighting chance at the Senate race there, and maybe if this was a redder year than it is. But we are talking about the Republican Party that is struggling to win a seat where they have an incumbent Republican. So why, in any reality, would Colorado be winnable for the GOP? Because quite frankly, it is not at this point. But the fact remains. The GOP launched ads in these states. Mitch McConnell's Senate Leadership Fund launched ads in these states. It doesn't exactly get that much better when you look at the governor's elections as well. What we have found is that Republicans have decided to fund money into some races where it simply doesn't make sense either. They still think they have a chance in Michigan. We'll read the tea leaves in the way that you've read them in Pennsylvania. That's also going to be a blowout for Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We've also started to see a clear and steady increase for Janet Mills's chances in the state of Maine. We've seen a clear and steady increase for Jared Polis' chances in the state of Colorado, a state where the GOP has a 1% chance, and the RGA has allocated more funding and more of an endorsement to Heidi Ganahl than they did to Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania. They would fund these races if they had the money. So when priorities get called into play, when they run out of money, they drop Colorado, but they also drop Pennsylvania. They drop the state of Washington, but they also drop the state of Arizona. Because quite frankly, this race seems to be, to Mitch McConnell, a lost cause for the GOP. I don't agree. I don't agree from this circumstance. I do think that, yes, Mark Kelly is probably going to win, and if you spend money here, it might be wasted. But who knows what happens between now and November. A lot can happen, and a lot probably will happen. We forget how often we have this October surprise, and as much as I would like to say these are the smartest and brightest political minds in this country, I also see where there is a very clear mistake. But when Mark Kelly wins this election this November, and I say that because we're getting so close to the election that I'm becoming way more comfortable in my predictions, when Mark Kelly wins this November, I could be wrong, right? I'm saying this for the sake of saying it. I'm going to repeat it for the third time. Sorry if it's annoying you. When Mark Kelly wins this November, people are going to see that and say, okay, Mitch McConnell made the right call. But this call was made a month and a half ago. What if Mitch McConnell had spent that $28 million that he invested in Ohio in Arizona? Because quite frankly, Ohio is probably going to go red the same way that Arizona is going to go blue. While Democrats did fight for Ohio, it was never their priority. Arizona was, and then was dropped. Ohio was never even on the radar for the National Democrats. And that's honestly why I honestly think the Democratic Party has done so well. Because in not focusing on Ohio, they shored up their bases. They played defense very well. And also the national environment did shift. Shifted enough that Ohio is now in contention in a way that Arizona no longer is. I would also be naive to say that I think Ohio is going to be closer than Arizona. Inherently, Ohio is a right-leaning state. Inherently, Arizona is a swing state. And that's why I think Arizona could be closer than Ohio. But I am still in a way, equally as confident in both candidates in their respective races. J.D. Vance in Ohio, Mark Kelly in Arizona. The Republican Party's financial troubles are causing issues that have already seen a direct impact and pushback against their chances at the majorities in the House, Senate, and governorships. The Republican Party, if they did have the amount of money that they did previously, or were continue to outpace and out-fundraise month after month after month, as they did. And I didn't talk about Trump. I guess I forgot to come to that point. But the long story short here is that Trump has over $100 million, promised to spend some of that money on the races. But here's the thing. He needs money for his 2024 bid. And while he can fundraise it, I also don't think he's necessarily going to funnel that much money into the campaign. And at some point in time, money can't save you. People are already early voting in Michigan. People are already early voting in other states. And then it becomes difficult. Because if a very significant portion of the state has already cast their ballots, there's no longer that many more people to win over. And it becomes more difficult, and it honestly benefits the Democratic Party at this point, because right now they're up, up, and up. in nearly every single competitive Senate race when it comes down to these midterm elections. So I will watch the money game as close as you would like me to. I'm going to continue to report and show you guys what's happening when it comes down to Senate fundraising, House fundraising, governor fundraising, because you can read the tea leaves. If Mitch McConnell's Senate leadership PAC is giving up Arizona, it means Mark Kelly's probably going to run. If Doug Ducey and Pete Ricketts, the chairman of the National Governors Association for the Republican Party, are giving up Pennsylvania, it probably means Josh Shapiro is going to win. And as we get closer to November, priorities become much more important. The Republican Party will be forced to cancel ads in states where they otherwise might have been able to have them 2 months prior to, but when they get to a point where they no longer have consistent means of fundraising, that's when they have to slash ads. We saw it with Trump in Arizona in 2020. Biden won the state. We saw it with Trump in states that he ended up winning. It's not a perfect science, but this far out canceling ads is never a good sign, especially when the Democrats lead by 6, 7, 8 points in a Senate race, 10, 11, 12, 15 points in the governor's race. They are giving it up, and we'd be foolish to not see what they are trying to tell us, but at the same time, they also might be wrong, just as we can be, because politics is also not a perfect science. That's not to cast doubt on the entirety of this video. I stand by everything that I said, but what I will say is that we still need to look at this saying there is still the possibility Doug Mastriano is the next governor. There's still a possibility that Blake Masters is the next senator, with or without Ducey, Ricketts, or McConnell, because they aren't everyone, and they aren't the ones voting in these elections. None of them live in the states that I just mentioned, so quite frankly, it isn't truly up to them, but in many ways, it also is. The interesting dynamic of American politics, something that we've been able to explore but never fully able to understand. I honestly don't think I'll ever be able to fully understand American politics, but at least we can try to do it together. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.